I pushed open my father's front door after a year on the other side of the world, my pack still heavy on my shoulders, the smell of desert dust still baked into my sleeves. The living room glowed a soft amber, warm and lived in, when it should have been dark and empty. A woman I had never seen stood in the middle of it, framed by my own photographs on the wall. She turned toward me, slow, and pressed her hand flat against something small and silver at the base of her throat. My boots went cold on the floorboards. The pack slid off and hit the ground. My breath stopped, and she asked me, "Don't you recognize me? My name is Adam Barrett. I am 34 years old. Army, Staff Sergeant, 3 deployments behind me, and..." That night, one just ended. That house in Colorado Springs was my father's house, the one he left me when he passed, and I had just come home to it after a year I had spent most of trying not to remember. I have never been a loud man, my father wasn't either. He raised me to keep my word, keep my space clean, and keep my mouth shut until I had something worth saying. So that is how I lived. Alone, mostly. Quiet. I made my bed with corners you could bounce a coin off. I kept the coffee in the same cupboard he always kept it in, and I told myself the silence in that house was peace, and not just the shape a life takes when you stop expecting anyone to fill it. I had been divorced for 18 months by then. No kids. My marriage had ended the way a lot of them end, slowly, and then all at once. And when the papers were finally signed, I did what I always do with pain. I packed it down, zipped it up, and carried it somewhere far away where I could pretend it belonged to somebody else. This last tour had been that somewhere. A year of heat and noise, and the particular loneliness you only feel in a crowd of men who are all just as far from home as you are. The whole flight back, all I had wanted was that door, my father's door. The click of the lock, the smell of the place, the plain miracle of standing in a room where nothing was trying to kill me and nobody needed anything from me. I had rehearsed it like a prayer. Drop the bag, sit on the couch, breathe. That is not what I walked into. The lamp by the couch was on, the good one with the crooked shade my father never bothered to fix. There was music playing low somewhere in the back of the house, and there was a woman standing in my living room like she belonged there, like I was the one who had wandered in by mistake. My first instinct, honest to God, was to call the police. A stranger in my house after dark, a soldier's home broken into while he was overseas. It is not a hard story to imagine. My thumb was already moving. But she didn't run. She didn't scream or fumble for an excuse. She just stood there, very still, one hand pressed to her chest as if she were holding something in place. And she looked at me the way you look at a face you have waited a long time to see. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice flat and even, the way you do when you are trying to lower the temperature in a room. "I don't know who you are, but this is my house." She didn't flinch. If anything, something in her softened. "I know it is," she said. "That's kind of the point." I didn't understand what that meant. I wouldn't understand it for a long time. But the way she said it, calm and sad and certain all at once, kept my thumb from dialing. That was when I noticed it. A small silver medal on a thin chain at her throat, the metal worn soft from years of being touched. She had her fingers curled around it now, the way some people hold a cross when they pray. Something about that medal tugged at a place in me I couldn't name. A quick, strange ache, here and gone, like hearing 3 notes of a song you used to know and losing it before the 4th. I told myself it was nothing. Jet lag, a year of bad sleep. I looked past her, and the rest of the room came into focus. A mug still steaming on the counter. The coffee I could smell from the doorway. My father's photographs on the wall, every frame dusted and straight, cleaner than I had ever kept them. This was not a break-in. Nobody breaks into a house to wipe the dust off another man's memories. Someone had been living here, drinking coffee in my father's kitchen, taking better care of his pictures than his own son had. And she was still watching me, waiting, her hand over that little silver medal like it was the only thing holding her together. We did not sleep that first night. Not really. Once my heart came down out of my throat, I did the reasonable thing. I asked her to explain, and she did, and what she said was so ordinary it almost disappointed me. She had a lease, a real one. She pulled it out of a drawer in the hall table, already knowing which drawer, and handed me the pages without a word. I read it twice under the crooked lamp. It was legitimate. First and last month's rent, a signature, a start date 4 months back. The property was listed under my name, my father's address, all of it correct. The manager who had signed the lease and taken her money was somebody listed as V. Miller. I turned the name over in my head. Miller. For 5 years it had been a married name I no longer used, and tired as I was, it slid right past me. I set the paper down, rubbed my eyes, and told myself I would sort it out in daylight. I paid every month, she said quietly. On time. I have the receipts. She said it the way honest people say things when they are afraid of being taken for liars. If this is your house, and there's been some kind of mistake, I'll leave. I don't want any trouble. I just need a day or two to find somewhere else. I looked at her standing in my father's living room, holding a lease that said she had every right to be there, and I could not for the life of me make her into a threat, so I didn't call anyone. I slept on the couch that night with my boots still on, and she slept behind a locked bedroom door, and in the morning neither of us had run. That is how it started. This strange, careful arrangement between two strangers who each had a claim to the same 4 walls. I should have been counting the days until I got my house to myself. Instead, I found myself on the drive back to the motel each night, already thinking about the next morning. What she might say, whether she would have the coffee going. It had been a long time since I looked forward to anything that wasn't the end of something. I could have made her leave. Legally, morally, I probably had the standing, but something stopped me every time I opened my mouth to say it. Partly, it was decency. She had paid in good faith. Whatever had gone wrong, it had not gone wrong because of her. And partly, if I am honest, it was that the house had been so unbearably empty in my head for a year, and now it wasn't, and some tired animal part of me did not want to be alone in it again just yet. So I stayed at a motel by the highway for a few nights while I chased down the paperwork, and I came by in the daytime, and slowly the arrangement turned into something almost like living together. Her name was Grace. She was a traveling nurse, she told me, on a contract at the Veterans Hospital across town. She worked long shifts and came home tired and moved through the house like she had lived there for years. That was the first thing that unsettled me. She knew things, small things, things a stranger should not have known. The second morning I came by, I opened the wrong cupboard looking for a filter, and without looking up from her tea, she said, "Second shelf, on the left, behind the sugar." And she was right. That was exactly where my father kept them. Where I kept them. I had never told her that. Another time I found her standing in front of the wall of photographs, very close, studying one particular frame. It was an old picture of my father in his dress uniform, young, squinting into the sun. "That's your dad," she said. Not a question. She said it softly, almost tenderly, like she had said it to herself many times before. "He has your jaw. How do you know that's my father?" I asked. She went quiet for a second too long. Then she smiled, a small, careful smile, and said, "You look like him." It wasn't hard. I let it go, but it stuck to me, the way a splinter stays under the skin long after you stop looking at it. Looking back now, I can see everything I missed. I can see it so clearly it almost hurts. The way she lingered over my photographs when she thought I wasn't watching, the way her eyes went to me and then away, quick, whenever I walked into a room, like she was rationing her looks. The way she took care of things in that house I had never asked her to take care of. My father's pictures, my mail, the porch light left on for a man who was not coming home for a year. At the time I told myself she was just polite, A tidy woman, a good tenant, nothing more. I was so sure I was reading her right. I was reading her completely wrong, and every person who has ever loved someone from a distance would have seen it before I did. There was the medal, too. She touched it constantly, that little silver disc on its worn chain. Whenever a conversation turned toward anything real, anything about her life before this city, her hand would drift up and close around it, and her words would go careful and thin. It was clearly the most precious thing she owned. One evening, she reached across the table to pass me the salt, and the medal swung free of her collar, and for half a second I saw the back of it in the lamplight. There was something engraved there. Letters, worn, almost smooth. My heart did a strange thing, a hard skip, a jolt of recognition with nothing attached to it. Then she tucked it back under her shirt, and the moment closed, and I told myself, again, that I was tired and imagining things. "You keep touching that necklace," I said finally. One night, when the quiet between us had gotten comfortable enough to risk a question, her hand froze against her chest. For a moment she didn't answer. Then, very simply, she said, "It's the only thing I've never taken off." There was so much in that sentence. A whole life, folded up small. I heard it, and I still didn't understand it. I just nodded, like a man who understood, and let the silence come back. Spring was coming on outside all the while. The evening stretched a little longer, the cold let go of the yard, and rain would come through soft after dark and tick against the screen door. We spent a lot of those evenings not saying much, and I kept catching the small metallic sound of that chain when she moved, the metal shifting against a button on her collar. I had no idea then that I already knew that sound. The strange part, the part I could not explain to myself, was how easy she was to be around. I had spent a year bracing for noise and demands and threat, and here was this quiet woman who asked nothing of me, who left me coffee in the morning without being asked, who could sit in the same room as me for an hour without needing to fill it with words. It felt, against every instinct I had, like being known, like coming home to someone who had been keeping the lamp on. And it scared me, because it did not add up, because a good, kind, watchful woman does not simply appear in a lonely man's house by accident, fitting into the empty places of his life like she was measured for them. Something was underneath all of it. I could feel the shape of it without being able to see it. So I did what I do. I went looking for the truth. Not her truth, not yet. The paperwork truth. I wanted to know who V. Miller was, and how a stranger had come to sign a lease on my father's house while I was overseas, and whose account had been collecting rent on a home I had never once agreed to rent out. I made some calls. I pulled some records, and the answer, when it came, found me sitting on the porch step with the rain coming down soft against the screen, the smell of wet spring earth rising off the yard, and a bank statement shaking a little in my hand. The rent had a destination. 4 months of it, every payment Grace had made in good faith, had gone straight into a checking account that was not mine and had never been mine. I stared at the name on the statement for a long time before it stopped looking like letters and started meaning something. Vanessa Miller. Her maiden name, the one she took back after the divorce, the one I had failed to hear on the lease. My ex-wife. I had not rented out my father's house. I had never agreed to a single thing about it. When I deployed, all I had done was ask her, one civil favor between two people who were trying to end things without drawing blood, to forward my mail and swing by now and then so the place didn't sit there looking abandoned. I had given her a key for that. One key, one purpose. And while I was gone, she had listed the house I grew up in, furnished it with my father's furniture and my father's pictures still on the walls, handed the key to a stranger, and quietly funneled the money into her own pocket. For a moment I just sat there with the rain on the screen and the porch light buzzing over my head, and I let myself feel how far the betrayal reached. It was not only the money, it was that she had put a stranger inside the last thing my father left me, and never once thought to ask. I read that statement 3 times, sitting on the cold porch step, and each time the anger settled deeper into my chest. Not the hot kind, the cold, heavy kind, the kind that knows exactly who to aim itself at. She had done this while I was gone, while I was counting days in a place where men do not always come home. She had looked at my empty house and seen an opportunity, and she had taken it, the way she had taken everything else worth taking during the years we were married. I did not have to go find her. She came to me. 2 days later, she was on the porch, and she filled the doorway the way she filled every room she had ever walked into, loud and bright and absolutely certain she was the smartest person present. "Adam," she said, like my name was a party she was throwing. "You're home. You look terrible. Come here." I did not come there. I held up the bank statement. She barely blinked. That was the thing about Vanessa. She could pivot faster than the truth could catch her. Okay, before you say anything," she said, spreading her hands, already smiling. "I was managing it for you. The house was just sitting here, Adam. Empty. It's not good for a house to sit empty, everybody knows that. I found you a nice, quiet tenant. I kept the place from falling apart, and I was going to give you your share the second you got back. I did you a favor. You rented my father's house," I said, slow, each word its own stone, "and you kept the money. For 1 second, just one, something flickered behind her eyes. She knew exactly what she had done, and she knew that I knew, and the ground under her little story was gone. And then, because she has always been quicker at ruining people than at telling the truth, she did what she does best. She found someone else to point at. Grace had come to the doorway behind me. I felt her there before I saw her, that quiet presence I had gotten used to. Vanessa's eyes locked onto her, and her whole face changed, curdled into something sharp and delighted. "Oh, that's rich," Vanessa said. "That's really rich. You're mad at me?" "Adam, do you have any idea who you're actually living with? Do you even know how she ended up in this house?" "She answered a listing," I said. "Your listing. She answered my listing because it was your house. You think that's a coincidence? Wake up. She picked your house on purpose. She's been following you. I saw the way she looked at your pictures when I showed her the place. I saw it, and I thought, that's a woman with a plan. A decorated soldier, a house, a pension, a nice quiet target who's lonely and just got back and doesn't know which way is up. She's not some innocent tenant, Adam. She came here for you. And here is the terrible thing. Here is the part I have thought about 1,000 times since. Some of it was true. Grace had chosen this house on purpose. I would learn that soon enough, from her own mouth. But Vanessa did not know why, and she did not care why, because the why did not serve her. She took a true thing and bent it into a weapon, sharpened it, and drove it straight into the one soft place I had left. She needed me looking at Grace, so I would stop looking at her. She needed a monster in the room, and any monster would do, as long as it wasn't her. That is the thing people never tell you about a good lie. It does not have to be all lie. The strongest ones are built on a splinter of truth, so that when you go to pull them out, the true part catches, and you bleed. Vanessa had found her splinter and she drove it deep, and part of me, the tired part, the part that had been alone for a year, felt it catch. It worked. I am not proud of it, but it worked, because I was tired, and I was raw, and I had just found out that the woman I once married had been robbing me from 4,000 miles away. And now here was another woman I could not explain, who knew where I kept my coffee, and which face on the wall was my father's, who had appeared in my empty life, fitting all its empty spaces. Vanessa had handed me a story that made sense of the thing I couldn't make sense of. And a tired man will grab the explanation that fits, even when it's the wrong one. I turned around. I looked at Grace. Really looked at her, and I let the doubt into my eyes where she could see it. "Is that true?" I asked. My voice came out colder than I meant it to, colder than I have ever been proud of. "Did you pick this house because it was mine?" She did not cry. "I want that on the record, because it is the thing I remember most." Another person would have crumbled, would have wept and denied and begged. Grace just went very still. Her hand came up to the metal at her throat and closed around it so hard I could see the tendons stand out on the back of her hand, the knuckles going white. She held on to that little piece of silver like it was the last solid thing in a room that was tilting under her feet. Behind me, Vanessa let out a small, satisfied breath, the sound of a woman watching a plan land. Her perfume filled the doorway, sweet and heavy, swallowing the clean smell of the coffee Grace had made that morning, and her heels clicked once against the floorboards as she shifted her weight, settling in to enjoy it. And Grace looked at me, steady, holding that metal, and I could see her deciding something, deciding whether to fight for herself or whether some things cost too much to say out loud. The whole house held its breath, and then she opened her mouth to answer me. "Yes," she said. "I picked this house because it was yours." Vanessa made a triumphant sound behind me, but Grace wasn't talking to her. She was talking to me, only to me, in that same even voice she'd had since the first night, the voice of someone who has decided the truth is worth more than her own protection. "But not for the reason she just gave you," Grace said. "Not for your pension, not for your house. I never wanted anything from you, Adam. I've spent 9 years trying to figure out how to give something back." "I don't understand," I said. "I know you don't," she said. "That's the hardest part. You don't remember me. There's no reason you would. It was one night, a long time ago, and I wasn't anyone you'd ever remember." She took a breath, and she told me. 9 years ago, she said, on a dark stretch of highway, a 17-year-old girl had been trapped in the wreck of a car that should have killed her. There had been glass and smoke and the sound of metal still ticking, and she had been sure, in a calm and distant way, that she was going to die alone in the dark. And then a young soldier who happened to be driving that road had pulled over, climbed into the wreckage with her, and refused to leave. He had held pressure on her wounds and talked to her the whole time, telling her to stay, telling her to hold on, telling her she was going to make it when there was no reason on earth to believe it. And when the paramedics finally pried the door open, when they were lifting her out and she was slipping away from the fear and the cold, that soldier had pressed something into her hand and closed her fingers around it. Something small. Something silver. "You told me," Grace said, and her voice caught for the first time. Just once, then steadied. "You told me it got your dad home, and that it would get me home too." I could not breathe. The room tilted. 9 years folded shut like a hand. I was not in my living room anymore. I was on that highway in the dark, 25 years old and terrified, kneeling in broken glass beside a girl who was fading, saying the only words I had, the words my father gave me. "Hold on. This got him home. It will get you home too." I had never once let myself wonder what happened to her after the ambulance doors closed. I had assumed the worst and buried it. The way I buried everything. She reached up behind her neck and unclasped the chain. She crossed the room, took my hand, turned it palm up, and laid the little silver medal in the center of it. It was still warm from resting against her skin. A St. Christopher medal, patron saint of travelers, the metal worn soft from 9 years of being touched. I turned it over with my thumb, already knowing, already terrified of what I would find. There, engraved on the back and worn almost smooth, were my father's initials, the medal he had carried through his own war, the medal he had pressed into my hand before I left for basic, telling me the same words his father had told him, the medal I had given away one night on a dark highway to a dying girl I was sure would not live to see morning, because in that moment I could not think of anything else to give her, and I could not stand the thought of her going without something to hold. I had spent 9 years believing that medal was gone, buried with a stranger, lost in a hospital drawer, or dropped in the weeds by the roadside. I had mourned it quietly, the last real piece of my father, and I had made my peace with never seeing it again. And it had been here, on her, the whole time. "You said this would get me home," Grace said, closing my fingers around it the way I had once closed hers. It took me 9 years. But I brought it back to the man it belonged to. I looked at her, and the years fell away, and I saw it. The girl in the wreck. Grown up, healed, standing in my living room. She had not lied to me about a single thing. She was a nurse, on a real contract, at the Veterans Hospital, and she had needed a place to live, and that was all true. And she had also, when she saw my name on that listing and my father's face in those photographs, chosen this house on purpose. Because it was the home of the man who once told her to hold on, and she had never stopped wanting to say thank you. 2 reasons. Both of them true, neither of them what Vanessa had made them into. I gave that to a girl, I said, and my voice was not steady anymore. I was sure wouldn't make it. She almost didn't, Grace said. She just never stopped trying to say thank you. I turned around. Vanessa was still standing in the doorway, but her face had gone strange, uncertain, watching her weapon come apart in her hands, and I understood, all at once and completely, the difference between the 2 women in that room. One had taken a truth and twisted it into something ugly to save herself. The other had carried a truth for 9 years and offered it up, gently, knowing it might cost her everything. I did not have to think about who to believe. I had already known, somewhere under all my exhaustion, since the first night she pressed her hand to her chest and asked me if I recognized her. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the mantel. I closed my hand around my father's medal, still warm from her, and I made my choice. I asked Vanessa to leave. Not loudly. I didn't have it in me to match her volume, and I didn't need to. What came after her was quieter and more final than any argument. I laid it all out in daylight, in front of people whose job it is to care about these things. She had listed a house she did not own, signed a lease she had no authority to sign, and collected 4 months of another person's rent into her own account. There are plain words for that, and none of them were on her side. She could have fought it. She chose not to. Faced with the paperwork and the prospect of the whole thing going somewhere she could not charm her way out of, she gave the money back, every dollar of it, signed what she needed to sign, and walked out of my life for good. No courtroom, no spectacle. Just a door closing on a chapter I should have closed a long time before. And then, for the first time in longer than I could remember, the house was just ours, mine and Grace's. Though it took us both a while to say a word like ours out loud, the strange thing was how little needed saying. We had already spent 4 months learning the rhythm of each other before either of us knew what we were learning. She knew I took my coffee black and early. I knew she couldn't settle until the dishes were done. The house had trained us for a life together, while we were both still calling ourselves strangers, and now we just kept going. Only softer. Only without the walls up. We did not rush into anything. That is not who either of us is. What we had, we built the slow way, one ordinary evening at a time. She would come home from a long shift at the Veterans Hospital, tired down to the bone, and tell me about the old men she took care of, the ones with the same faraway look I sometimes caught in my own mirror. I would have something warm on the stove. We would sit at my father's table and talk until the talking ran out, and then we would just sit, comfortable in the quiet. And I began to understand that I had spent my whole life mistaking silence for loneliness, when the right silence is the opposite of it. There was no fireworks to it, and that was the point. It was small things, repeated, her keys in the bowl by the door. My boots lined up under the bench, the way she started humming in the kitchen without noticing she was doing it, the way I started leaving the porch light on for her instead of for a ghost. Piece by piece, a house that had only ever held one lonely man learned how to hold 2 people who were choosing each other. I learned how to be home. That is the honest way to say it. For years I had been a man who was only ever passing through his own life, waiting for the next thing to carry him away. Grace taught me, without ever trying to teach me anything, how to stay, how to put my boots by the same door every night, how to notice a spring morning, how to belong to a place and to a person, instead of just guarding them from a distance. She was easy to love, once I let myself do it. Not because she made it dramatic, but because she never did. She loved the way she had waited, quietly, without demanding anything back, and being on the other end of that kind of steadiness, after the years I'd had, felt like setting down a weight I had carried so long I'd stopped feeling it. Some nights, I would look at her across my father's table and feel something close to disbelief that she had been out there the whole time, carrying me around her neck. Neither of us said the word love for a long while. We just kept showing up, and one day it was simply there, the way a season arrives without announcing itself. Winter came, then spring again. 14 months, and somewhere in there the house stopped feeling like a place I was guarding and started feeling like a place I was living in. The photographs on the wall got a few new frames. My father's chair got sat in. The porch light came on for both of us now. There was one hard evening in the middle of all of it. She got quiet in a way I had learned to pay attention to, and finally she told me what was underneath it. She was afraid, she said, that I had only kept her out of some debt, that I looked at her and saw the girl I saved, the promise I'd made, the medal I owed a home to, and that gratitude was not the same thing as love, and she could not stand the thought of being someone's unpaid bill. I did not argue with her. Arguing has never once convinced anyone of anything. Instead, I did the only thing I knew that was truer than words. The next morning, I got up before her, and I made the coffee, and I fixed the crooked lampshade my father never fixed and I never fixed, and I hung a photograph of the two of us on the wall between all the old ones, so she would see, every single day, that she was not a debt I was paying off. She was family I had decided to keep. And then one evening, when the last of the snow was melting off the porch railing and dripping soft into the flower beds, and the whole house smelled like something she was baking in my father's kitchen, I took the medal off my own neck, where I had worn it since the day she gave it back. I stood behind her, and I reached around, and I clasped that thin, worn chain at the base of her throat, right where it had lived for 9 years before she ever found me. "My dad said this brings you home," I told her. "It brought me all the way to you, so you keep it. I'm already home." She turned around inside my arms, and she pressed her hand flat against her chest, over the medal, over her heart, the exact same way she had that first night in the doorway when she asked me a question I was too blind to answer. Only this time I answered it. This time I recognized her completely, all the way down, and I told her so. And I asked her the question a man asks once in his life and means with everything he has. She said yes before I finished asking. I have thought a lot, since then, about how close I came to getting it wrong. The loudest voice in the room is almost never the most honest one. The people who twist the truth do it at volume, because volume is how you drown out the quiet, and the quiet is where the real thing usually lives. Vanessa filled every doorway she walked through. Grace stood at the edge of a room for 4 months, holding the most important truth of my life against her chest, and could barely bring herself to say it. I nearly let the loud one rob me of the quiet one. I nearly threw away the best thing that ever came into my father's house because a liar told a story that was easier to believe. For 9 years I thought I had given my father's medal away to a stranger on a dark road. I had made my peace with losing it. But I hadn't lost it at all. I had just left it with the one person who spent that whole time learning how to bring me home. I think about my father a lot now, about a man who carried a small silver saint through his own war, came home, and handed it to his son, and how that one quiet act reached all the way down a dark highway years later and pulled a girl back into the world. Some things you give away find their way home. You just have to be there when they knock. So, let me ask you 2 things, and I mean them. Would you have recognized the person who once saved your life, years later, standing in your own doorway? And when one person tells you the truth about loving you, and another twists that same truth into a weapon, whose voice do you choose to believe? If this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe so the next one finds you, and tell me down in the comments, who would you have believed?